The massive lecture hall stretched out like a glittering cave made of crystal and light. Every surface seemed alive, pulsing with soft blue energy that made the air itself hum with power. Students from dozens of different worlds sat in seats that changed shape to fit their bodies perfectly. Some had wings, others had tentacles, and a few looked like walking trees with glowing eyes. Professor Veldar stood at the front of the room, his pale silver skin catching the light as he moved. His 4 arms worked independently, one pointing at controls while another held notes and the other 2 gestured at the huge floating screen above him. He was old, even by alien standards, and his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen entire civilizations rise and fall. "Students, settle down," he said, though his tone was gentle. "Today we will study one of the most interesting cases in our files." The chatter died down as creatures of all shapes and sizes focused their various types of eyes on their professor. In the 3rd row, a young woman named Jiho shifted in her seat. Her skin was like looking through colored glass, a soft blue that seemed to glow from within. She was an Etherian, one of the few species that could sense emotions and hidden thoughts, though she tried not to use this ability too often. "We are going to examine Sol 3, Professor Veldar announced, touching a control with one of his long fingers. "The 3rd planet in a small system at the edge of our galaxy. The locals call their world Earth." Immediately, snickers and giggles filled the room. A student with green scales and multiple eyes rolled all of them at once. "Oh, the violent primitives," she hissed through sharp teeth. "This should be amusing." Professor Veldar's expression remained neutral as the holographic display came to life above their heads. The image showed a blue and green planet spinning slowly in space. It looked peaceful enough, with white clouds swirling over brown and green continents. "Do not let appearances fool you," the professor said. "This world is home to a species that has puzzled our greatest minds for decades." The image changed, showing creatures that walked on 2 legs with pink or brown skin and hair growing only on top of their heads. They looked small and weak compared to most of the students in the room. "Humans," Professor Veldar said simply. "At first glance they appear quite ordinary. They have no natural weapons, no thick shells, no poison, and no ability to fly. Their bodies are soft and break easily." A student who looked like a giant insect clicked his mandibles together. "Then why are we studying them? They sound pathetic." The professor's 4 eyes blinked slowly. "Patience, young Kexvar. Let us examine their behavior." The hologram shifted again, now showing scenes that made several students gasp or laugh. Humans were fighting each other with metal weapons that shot small projectiles. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers across landscapes. Flying machines dropped bombs that turned entire areas into craters. For their entire recorded history, Professor Veldar explained, humans have been at war. They fight over resources, ideas, invisible lines they draw on maps, and sometimes for reasons that make no sense at all to logical minds. "Barbarians," whispered a student made of living crystal, her voice tinkling like broken glass. "How have they not killed themselves off?" "An excellent question, Aralyn," the professor replied. "They came very close several times. Observe." New images appeared showing massive explosions that could be seen from space. Mushroom clouds rose like terrible flowers, and the students could see the devastating power contained in these weapons. "They developed nuclear weapons nearly a century ago," Professor Veldar continued. "Bombs powerful enough to destroy entire cities in seconds. They built thousands of these weapons and pointed them at each other. The room fell quiet except for the humming of the crystal walls. Even the most warlike students seemed impressed by the scale of destruction humans had created. Yet somehow, the professor said, his voice taking on a puzzled tone, they have managed not to destroy themselves. They came close during something they call the Cold War, but they pulled back from the edge of extinction. A floating creature that looked like a jellyfish with glowing tentacles pulsed with different colors as it spoke. If they are so violent and have such powerful weapons, why have they not spread to other worlds? Even we achieved space flight within decades of splitting the atom. Professor Veldar paused, and Jiho noticed something strange in his expression. For just a moment he looked worried, afraid. The emotion passed so quickly she wondered if she had imagined it. "This is indeed the mystery," he said carefully. "Humans have the technology to reach other worlds. They have visited their own moon and sent probes throughout their system. Yet they remain confined to their single planet, showing no signs of expanding outward." The images changed again, showing human cities with millions of people crowded together, their primitive vehicles clogging streets, and factories pumping smoke into the air. "Their society is chaotic and inefficient," Professor Veldar continued. "They cannot agree on basic facts, let alone coordinate large projects. They pollute their own world while knowing it will kill them. They are, by any measure, a failed species. Laughter erupted from the students. The insect-like Kexvar clicked his mandibles rapidly. They sound like the worst kind of primitives. Violent but stupid, powerful but self-destructive. Indeed, Professor Velder said, but Jiho noticed his forearms had gone completely still. Your assignment for next class is to write a report explaining why Earth should remain under permanent quarantine. I want you to analyze their society and explain why contact with such a chaotic species would be dangerous for galactic civilization. As the other students began chattering excitedly about the easy assignment, Jiho remained silent. Her Etherian senses were picking up something that bothered her deeply. Throughout the entire lecture, she had felt waves of emotion from Professor Veldar that did not match his words. He spoke of humans with contempt and dismissal, calling them failures and primitives. But underneath his calm exterior, Jiho sensed something else entirely. Something that made her skin crawl with unease. Fear. Professor Veldar was absolutely terrified of the humans. Jiho stared at the blank screen in front of her for the third hour that night. The cursor blinked mockingly as she tried to write her assignment about why humans should stay locked away from the rest of the galaxy. Around her, the dormitory was quiet except for the soft humming sound her roommate made when he was concentrating. Miho floated near his own desk, his gaseous body shifting between purple and green colors as he worked. He was a nebulan, which meant he had no solid form at all. Instead, he was like a cloud of colored gas that could think and talk. Right now, he was typing with tentacles made of compressed air, and the satisfied way his colors swirled told Jiho he was having no trouble with the assignment. This is so easy, Miho said, his voice coming from somewhere in the middle of his floating form. Humans are clearly dangerous primitives. Listen to this. He began reading from his paper. The human species shows all the signs of a failed civilization. They fight constantly, destroy their own environment, and refuse to work together even when facing extinction. They are too violent and chaotic to ever join galactic society. Jiho nodded absently, but her mind was elsewhere. Every time she tried to write something similar, the memory of Professor Veldar's hidden fear stopped her. Why would someone so old and wise be afraid of a species he claimed was primitive and weak? I am going to the library, she told Miho, closing her empty document. Now. It is past midnight. Miho's colors shifted to worried yellow. The assignment is not due for 3 days. I know. I just need to research more. The library was almost empty at this hour. A few night shift students from species that preferred darkness moved quietly between the shelves, but most of the vast space was silent. Jiho made her way to the research terminals, her translucent blue skin glowing softly in the dim light. She started with basic searches about Earth and humans, but everything she found was the same information from class. Primitive weapons, chaotic society, environmental destruction. It all painted humans as dangerous but stupid creatures who were more likely to hurt themselves than anyone else. But Jiho's family had connections to the university administration. Her mother was a respected diplomat, and her father worked in galactic intelligence. Their access codes were much higher than a normal student's. After looking around to make sure no one was watching, Jiho entered her father's credentials. Suddenly, thousands of new files appeared on her screen. Most of them were about Earth, and they were marked with security levels she had never seen before. Red symbols flashed next to classifications like Galactic Council Eyes Only and Maximum Security, Level Omega. What in the void? She whispered, clicking on the first file. Most of it was blacked out. Entire pages had been covered with digital ink, leaving only small fragments of text visible. But those fragments made no sense at all. Human berserker protocols activated during. Recommend immediate withdrawal of all forces. Casualties among Drakmari shock troops exceeded 90% within first. Request emergency session regarding Terra incident classification. The more she read, the more confused she became. These did not sound like reports about primitive, weak creatures. They sounded like military reports about a terrible battle. One file caught her attention because it was more recent than the others. It was titled Current Regulations Regarding Sol System Approach. When she opened it, her blood went cold. The file contained strict orders that no galactic military vessel was allowed to travel within 50 light-years of Earth without direct permission from the High Council. Any ship that violated this rule would be considered hostile and destroyed immediately. The punishment for even suggesting an unauthorized approach to Earth was removal from military service and exile. Jiho sat back in her chair, her mind racing. Why would such extreme rules exist for a species that was supposed to be trapped on their own planet? If humans were so weak and primitive, why did the entire galaxy seem terrified of getting too close to them? She spent hours digging through fragments of information. References to something called the Terra Incident appeared over and over, but she could not find any complete records of what had actually happened. Every file that mentioned it was either completely blacked out or missing entirely. As the sun began to rise outside the library windows, Jiho realized she needed help. Someone who had been around longer, someone who might remember things that were not written down anymore. The archive keeper worked in the deepest part of the library, in rooms so old they were built from actual stone instead of the crystal and metal used in newer buildings. Jiho had never spoken to him before, but she knew his reputation. Daewon was ancient even by galactic standards, and rumor said he remembered the early days of the Galactic Alliance. She found him in a room filled with crystalline storage devices that hummed with stored information. He was so old that his body had become almost transparent, like looking at a statue made of clear glass. Multiple eyes of different sizes covered his head, and they all turned to look at her as she entered. "Student Jiho," he said, and his voice sounded like wind blowing through empty caves. "I have been expecting you." "Expecting me?" "The curious ones always find their way here eventually." His many eyes blinked at different times, creating a strange rippling effect. "You have been searching for information about the humans. How did you know that?" Daewon's form flickered slightly, which might have been his version of a smile. "Child, I have been keeping the galaxy's secrets for longer than most species have existed. I know when someone discovers things they are not supposed to know." Jiho stepped closer, her heart beating fast. "Then you know what really happened? Why everyone is so afraid?" The ancient keeper was quiet for a long time, his transparent form growing even dimmer. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with something that might have been sadness. "Some knowledge carries a terrible price, young one. The truth about the humans is buried for very good reasons." "What truth?" Jiho pressed. "I found fragments about something called the Terra Incident, and military reports that make no sense. If humans are so primitive, why are there rules about staying away from them?" All of Daewon's eyes focused on her at once, and Jiho felt a chill run through her body. "Because, child," he whispered, "the galaxy does not fear humans for their cruelty or their violence. We fear them for what they might become." Daewon led Jiho through corridors she had never seen before, deep beneath the main library. The walls here were made of black stone that seemed to absorb light, and the air felt heavy with age and secrets. They walked past doors marked with symbols that hurt to look at directly, until finally they reached a circular room at the very bottom of the building. "Sit," the ancient keeper said, gesturing to a chair that grew out of the floor as she approached it. "What I am about to show you is forbidden knowledge. The High Council ordered these memories sealed forever." Jiho's heart pounded as she watched Daewon move to the center of the room. His transparent hands touched a series of crystal formations that began to glow with soft light. Suddenly, the entire room filled with ghostly images that seemed real enough to touch. 50 years ago, Daewon's voice echoed strangely in the crystal-lit space. "The galaxy was different. We were arrogant. We thought we understood everything about war and civilization and power." The images around them showed star maps with 3 different colored sections. Red for the Drakmari Empire, blue for the Hegemony of Worlds, and purple for the Psychor Alliance. These were the 3 most powerful military forces in the galaxy, each controlling hundreds of worlds and commanding fleets that could destroy entire planets. Earth had been discovered recently, Daewon continued, and the 3 powers wanted to know if this new species posed any threat. They each decided to send what they called minor expeditionary forces to test human defenses. The images shifted to show massive warships moving through space. Jiho gasped at the size of them. Each ship was larger than most cities, bristling with weapons that could crack moons in half. There were hundreds of them, moving in perfect formation toward the small blue dot that was Earth. The Drakmari sent their 3rd battle fleet, Daewon explained as red ships filled the view. Warriors who had conquered 40 worlds and never lost a battle. The Hegemony deployed their advanced strike group, led by artificial intelligence systems that could calculate the outcome of any conflict before it began. The Psychor sent their Mind War division, telepaths who could break enemy morale before the first shot was fired. Jiho watched the 3 fleets approach Earth from different directions. She expected to see the tiny human world surrender immediately, or perhaps try to hide. Instead, something completely unexpected happened. The primitive human ships that came out to meet them were laughably small and crude. Their weapons were simple projectiles and basic energy beams that should not have been able to scratch the alien warships. But as the battle began, Jiho realized she was watching something that had never happened before in galactic history. The humans were winning. How? She whispered, watching a tiny human fighter somehow destroy a Drakmari battlecruiser 10,000 times its size. They did not fight like any species we had ever encountered, Daewon said, his many eyes reflecting the crystal light. Watch carefully. The images showed human tactics that made no sense at all. Their ships would fly directly at alien weapons as if they wanted to be shot. But at the last second, they would change direction in ways that should have been impossible, using the alien ship's own firepower against each other. The Drakmari valued honor in battle, Daewon explained. They expected enemies to meet them in open combat, warrior to warrior. Instead, humans would signal surrender, wait for the Drakmari to lower their shields to accept the honorable defeat, then detonate hidden explosives. Jiho watched in horror as human pilots deliberately crashed their ships into alien vessels, taking out targets 100 times larger than themselves. That is suicide, she said. Yes. And it terrified the Drakmari more than any weapon could have. They were fighting an enemy that did not fear death, that would sacrifice themselves without hesitation to hurt their opponents. Their greatest warriors, beings who had faced dragons and void storms, began having mental breakdowns. The scene shifted to show the hegemony's forces. Their ships were controlled by advanced computers that could predict every possible move an enemy might make. But as Jiho watched, she saw these perfect machines being completely confused by human behavior. Human tactics made no logical sense, Daewon continued. They would make moves that any reasonable commander would know were mistakes, but somehow these mistakes would turn into victories. The hegemony's computers tried to model human decision-making and failed completely. Some of the AI systems actually shut themselves down rather than try to process the chaos. But it was the Psi-Corps that suffered the worst fate. Jiho watched as their telepathic warriors tried to read human minds and influence human thoughts, only to collapse screaming. The Psi-Corps had never encountered minds like humans, Daewon whispered. Most species think in organized, logical patterns. Even in war there is structure to their thoughts. But human minds during battle, they were pure chaos. Fear and rage and determination and creativity all mixed together in ways that made no sense. Many of the telepaths went insane trying to understand human thinking. The images showed alien fleets that had been confident and organized at the start of the battle slowly falling apart. Ships retreated without orders. Commanders made desperate calls for reinforcement. Some vessels simply fled the system entirely. But what came next made Jiho's blood freeze in her veins. The worst part, Daewon said, his transparent form growing even dimmer, was when the three alien commanders realized that the humans were not even trying their hardest. The crystal images showed a meeting between human military leaders during the battle. Jiho could hear their voices translated by the memory crystals, and what they said made her feel sick. Should we activate the planet crackers? One human asked casually. Not yet, replied another. Let's see how they handle conventional weapons first. Save the reality bombs for if they bring more ships. The biological weapons are ready if needed, said a third voice. Though the quantum viruses might be overkill. Jiho stared in shock. Planet crackers? Reality bombs? What are those? Daewon's many eyes closed slowly. We never found out, child. And we pray to every god in the galaxy that we never will. The humans were treating the invasion of three major galactic powers as a minor training exercise. They were holding back weapons that could apparently destroy planets and alter reality itself. The images showed the moment when the three alien fleets realized they were not facing a primitive species at all. They were fighting creatures that had built weapons so terrible that they scared themselves, and who treated interstellar war as a casual afternoon activity. The retreat began immediately, Daewon whispered. Three of the galaxy's most powerful military forces fled from a single planet populated by beings they had thought were primitives. As the crystal images faded away, Jiho sat in stunned silence. Everything she had been taught about humans was a lie. They were not weak or primitive at all. They were the most dangerous species in the galaxy, and they did not even realize it. Now you understand, Daewon said softly, why we keep them in quarantine. Not to protect the galaxy from them, but to protect them from learning just how much we fear them. The crystal images shifted again, and Jiho found herself watching the moment that changed everything. In the ghostly light of the memory crystals, she could see Earth as it appeared 50 years ago, with three massive alien fleets closing in from different directions. What happened next, Daewon said quietly, has never been seen before or since in all of galactic history. The images showed something that made Jiho's mind struggle to understand what she was seeing. Across the entire surface of Earth, every human nation that had been fighting each other just hours before suddenly stopped. Ancient enemies put down their weapons. Countries that had been at war for decades signed peace treaties in minutes. Leaders who had never spoken to each other were suddenly working together as if they had planned it for years. Impossible, Jiho whispered. No species can unify that quickly. Watch, Daewon said, and his many eyes reflected the crystal light with something that might have been wonder or terror. The memory crystals showed the moment when humanity realized they were facing not one, not two, but three different alien invasions at the same time. Instead of panicking or surrendering, they did something that no military computer in the galaxy had predicted. In less than 72 hours, every human government on the planet handed over control to a single emergency command structure. Every military force, every weapon system, every scientist and engineer suddenly began working toward one goal: defending their world against the alien threat. The three alien commanders were monitoring human communications, Daewon explained. They expected to see chaos and confusion. Instead, they watched humanity become a single, unified war machine in the span of 3 days. Jiho watched in amazement as the images showed what happened next. Across Earth's oceans, objects that had been hidden beneath the waves suddenly rose to the surface. Nuclear submarines emerged from the deep waters, but these were not the primitive vessels the aliens had detected earlier. These submarines were larger, more advanced, and there were hundreds of them. The aliens realized they had only been seeing a tiny fraction of human military power, Daewon continued. Every major nation had been hiding weapons from each other, and when they combined their hidden arsenals, the total firepower was... He paused, his transparent form flickering with remembered fear. Enough to crack planets apart, he finished quietly. But the submarines were just the beginning. As Jiho watched, the space around Earth suddenly filled with objects that had not been there before. Weapons platforms that had been completely invisible to alien sensors came online simultaneously. They had been hidden using technology that the three galactic powers did not even know was possible. How did they hide them? Jiho asked. We still do not know, Daewon admitted. Human stealth technology was apparently decades ahead of anything we had seen. They had been preparing for interstellar war while pretending to be primitive. The most terrifying moment came when human scientists began broadcasting messages on frequencies the aliens were monitoring. Jiho listened to the translated voices, and what she heard made her feel cold all over. Team 7, the calculations for weaponizing faster-than-light travel are complete, one human scientist reported calmly. We can have the reality distortion bombs ready in 6 hours. Excellent, replied another voice. Team 12 has finished the quantum virus prototypes. We can deploy biological weapons that operate outside normal space-time if needed. The planet crackers are already in position, said a third voice. Though using them might damage our own solar system. Jiho stared at the crystals in horror. They were talking about weapons that could. Weapons that could destroy reality itself, Daewon finished. And they were discussing them like humans might talk about what to have for lunch. The alien fleet commanders had been listening to these broadcasts too, and the memory crystals showed their growing panic. These were not primitive beings struggling to defend themselves. These were creatures who had apparently been building universe-ending weapons as a hobby. The three fleets tried to coordinate their attacks, Daewon explained, but human tactics became even more unpredictable once they were unified. Instead of fighting three separate battles, humanity was now treating this as a single war against multiple enemies. Jiho watched human forces that had been losing individual battles suddenly turn the tide completely. Ships that had been retreating regrouped and attacked with tactics that seemed to come from nowhere. The aliens found themselves being outmaneuvered by an enemy that was constantly changing strategy in ways their computers could not follow. The Drakmari had never faced an enemy that would sacrifice entire fleets just to learn how alien weapons worked, Daewon continued. The hegemony's AI systems began malfunctioning because they could not process human decision-making. The Psycore telepaths were going insane trying to read human minds that seemed to think in pure chaos. But the moment that ended everything came when humanity sent a single message to all three alien fleets simultaneously. The voice was calm and friendly, as if they were talking to neighbors who had dropped by for a visit. Hello, the human message said. We know you are testing our defenses and we appreciate the practice. However, we would prefer not to demonstrate the weapons we built for fighting each other. Please leave our system now and we can pretend this never happened. The message was accompanied by a data packet that showed the aliens exactly what humanity meant. Mathematical equations that proved humans had figured out how to turn stars into bombs. Technical specifications for devices that could erase entire solar systems. plans for biological weapons that could spread across galaxies and destroy all life. But the worst part, Daewon whispered, was the casual tone of the message. They were not threatening the aliens. They were politely asking them to leave before things got messy. The three alien commanders held emergency meetings with their home governments. Military leaders who had conquered hundreds of worlds suddenly faced a terrible choice: continue fighting a species that treated interstellar war as entertainment, or retreat and admit defeat to beings they had thought were primitives. The retreat began within hours, Daewon said. 3 of the most powerful military forces in galactic history fled from a single planet because they were afraid of what might happen if the inhabitants got serious about fighting. As the crystal images faded, showing the alien fleets disappearing into hyperspace, Daewon turned to face Jiho directly. The High Council met in emergency session the moment the fleets reported what had happened, he said. Every government leader, every military commander, every scientist who had access to the classified reports reached the same conclusion. What conclusion? Jiho asked, though she thought she already knew. That humanity must never learn how much they had terrified us, Daewon replied. The quarantine zone was established not to keep humans locked up, but to make sure they never found out that they had defeated the galaxy's 3 most powerful military forces while barely trying. Jiho sat in stunned silence, understanding finally dawning on her. The galaxy was not protecting itself from human violence or chaos. It was protecting itself from human potential. They do not even know, do they? She whispered. Daewon's many eyes closed slowly. No, child. Humans still think they are alone in the universe. And every galactic leader prays they never find out otherwise. 3 days later, Jiho walked into Professor Veldar's lecture hall with shaking hands. The weight of what she had learned pressed down on her like a physical thing, making it hard to breathe normally. Around her, her classmates chatted and laughed as they always did, completely unaware that their entire understanding of the universe was built on a lie. She took her usual seat in the 3rd row, watching as Professor Veldar prepared his materials at the front of the room. His 4 arms moved with their usual graceful efficiency, but now Jiho could see something she had missed before. There was tension in the way he held himself, a careful control that spoke of hidden knowledge and buried fears. Today we will continue our discussion of primitive civilizations, Professor Veldar announced as the students settled down. I trust you all completed your assignments regarding the quarantine of Earth? Eager hands shot up around the room. Yunho, a young Vextai with gleaming black carapace, was practically vibrating in his seat with excitement. Professor, my research showed that humans are even more pathetic than we thought. They cannot even agree on basic facts about their own world. Laughter rippled through the classroom. A Granari student made of living stone, her voice like grinding rocks, added, their chaotic thinking patterns make them completely inefficient. They waste enormous amounts of time and resources on pointless conflicts. Excellent observations, Professor Veldar said, but Jiho noticed that his voice sounded strained. What other conclusions did you reach? More students joined in, each trying to outdo the others in describing human failures. They mocked humanity's inability to work together, their primitive technology, their violent nature, and their apparent inability to expand beyond their own planet. They are like children playing with dangerous toys, said a floating jellyfish-like creature, its tentacles glowing with amusement. Except children eventually grow up. The laughter grew louder and Jiho felt sick listening to it. These students had no idea that they were making fun of the most dangerous species in the galaxy. They were laughing at beings who had casually mentioned weapons that could crack planets while treating an invasion by 3 major galactic powers as a training exercise. Perhaps, Yunho said, his mandibles clicking with what Jiho now recognized as foolish bravery, we should recommend that the High Council send a real fleet to show these humans their proper place in the galaxy. Make them understand that they are not as important as they think they are. The moment the words left his mouth, the entire room fell silent. It was not the comfortable quiet of students waiting for their professor to respond. It was the sudden, terrible silence that comes when someone says something deeply wrong without realizing it. Professor Veldar had gone completely still. All 4 of his arms stopped moving, his materials forgotten on the desk in front of him. For several long seconds he did not speak or move at all. When he finally looked up, his ancient eyes swept across the classroom until they found Jiho. She saw recognition there. Somehow he knew that she had discovered the truth. Perhaps it was something in her expression, or maybe professors at his level were always watching for students who dug too deep into classified information. Whatever the reason, Jiho felt exposed under his gaze, as if he could see right through her. Class dismissed, Professor Veldar said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. But Professor, Yunho protested, we still have half the period left, and I wanted to discuss my ideas for dealing with the human problem. Professor Veldar's four hands began to tremble, so slightly that most students would not have noticed. But Jiho saw it and she understood what it meant. The ancient professor was terrified that one of his students might actually convince someone in authority to take action against Earth. Some lessons, Professor Veldar said, his voice growing even quieter, are too dangerous to teach. The students looked confused and disappointed as they gathered their belongings and filed out of the room. Yunho was still grumbling about not getting to share his grand plans for putting humans in their place. The other students continued their casual mockery of humanity as they headed toward the door. Jiho remained in her seat, unable to move. She watched her classmates leave, knowing that they would go back to their dormitories and continue writing papers about human failures. They would recommend harsher quarantine measures, suggest ways to keep humanity contained, and propose methods for dealing with their primitive aggression. None of them understood that every suggestion they made was actually a description of why humanity was too dangerous to approach. When the last student had left, Professor Veldar slowly walked up the steps toward Jiho's seat. His four arms hung at his sides, and his ancient face looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. You know, he said simply. It was not a question. Jiho nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Professor Veldar sat down heavily in the seat next to her, something she had never seen a professor do during her entire time at the university. For a long moment, they both stared at the holographic display that still showed Earth spinning peacefully in space. How long have you known the truth? Jiho finally asked. I was there, Professor Veldar replied quietly. 50 years ago, I was a military advisor to the hegemony of worlds. I was on one of the ships that fled from that small blue planet. Jiho turned to stare at him in shock. You were part of the invasion? I was part of what we thought would be a simple evaluation mission, he corrected. We expected to catalog another primitive species and file a standard report. Instead, we encountered something that changed how we understand the universe itself. He gestured toward the image of Earth with one of his four hands. Do you see how peaceful it looks? How small and insignificant compared to the great civilizations of the galaxy. Jiho nodded. That is exactly what we thought when we first saw it, Professor Veldar continued. A tiny world filled with creatures that had barely learned to leave their own atmosphere. We were so wrong that it nearly cost us everything. The holographic Earth continued its slow rotation, white clouds swirling over blue oceans and green continents. It looked like the most harmless place in the universe. Every joke your classmates make about human inefficiency, Professor Veldar said softly, is actually a description of why they are unbeatable. Their chaos makes them unpredictable. Their violence makes them willing to sacrifice everything to win. Their inability to work together normally means that when they do unite, the result is absolutely terrifying. Jiho thought about Yunho's suggestion to send a real fleet, to put humans in their place, and she felt cold all over. What would happen if someone actually tried? Professor Veldar was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with a fear that had been growing for 50 years. Humanity has been at peace for decades now, he said. They think they are alone in the universe, so they have turned their attention to other things. Art, science, exploration of their own world. But their weapons are still there, hidden and waiting. And if they ever learned that there was a galaxy full of potential threats out there. He did not finish the sentence, but Jiho understood. Humanity's primitive technology and limited space presence was not because they were weak or failed. It was because they had not felt the need to expand yet. They were like a sleeping dragon that the galaxy was desperately trying not to wake up. The quarantine, Jiho whispered, finally understanding everything. It is not to protect the galaxy from them. No, Professor Veldar agreed. It is to protect them from learning the truth about us. Because the moment humanity discovers that they are not alone, they will realize that they need to expand beyond their single planet. And when they do, the thought hung in the air between them, terrible and unspoken. Jiho stared at the image of Earth and tried to imagine what would happen if humanity ever decided they needed more worlds, more resources, more space to grow. The galaxy would not be able to stop them. And deep down, Jiho suspected that humanity would not even realize they were conquering anything. They would probably think they were just exploring, making friends and sharing their culture with their new galactic neighbors. The most dangerous species in the universe, and they did not even know it,